All right, we are going to talk about why I think Graham Potter should still be the manager at Chelsea, which I do understand is a ridiculous claim to make, especially after a result yesterday against Southampton, who bottom of the league, no manager, and we lose 1-0 at home at Stamford Bridge. It's a hard pill to swallow, don't get me wrong, I understand that. But there are things that I don't think people are thinking about and looking at when it comes to Graham Potter as our manager long term. Yes, I understand results have been poor, but the reason why I'm talking about why we should keep him is because I would say Graham Potter has been a bit unlucky, unfortunate with what's happened this season so far. So first off, he came in after Thomas Tuchel had his own transfer window in the beginning of the season. So he had no time to work with them. And yes, you could argue that there's been enough time for him to implement his philosophy, but I'll get to that in a second. So we have players already coming in that, again, Graham Potter did not want. Aubameyang being one of those players who now is not on the list for a Champions League squad, which that is Graham Potter's decision. You could argue that he should be on there since we don't really have an out-and-out striker, but still, Graham Potter decided not to pick him up. And again, it makes sense. He's not the player that Graham Potter wanted, and therefore he's not going to bring him with him. That's fact number one. Number two is that there was a World Cup in between this entire season. This has never happened before. So to say that this is an anomaly season is, again, would be accurate for Graham Potter. That's just another thing that's been added to all the things that have been going on this season. And so therefore, Graham Potter, before the World Cup, was looking pretty good. I would argue that he was one of the better managers we had so far until the World Cup came. After that, I don't know what happened. Whether the players just got fatigued, certain things weren't happening, and again, we started having this kind of fallback where we started playing even worse than the World Cup. But again, that's another whole issue that Graham Potter had to overcome. After that, we have to then look at all the injuries he's dealt with this season. Now, yes, we've dealt with injuries before. This isn't a new thing for us, but we've had 10 major injuries. Now, most of those players are back finally, but in between this height of this poor run, we've had so many injuries that Graham Potter has had to throw different players each and every match in, which doesn't allow him to gel with all the players. On top of that, we also brought in a bunch of new players, a lot of young players. So again, these are not veteran players coming in right now. They're in their early 20s. There is a long-term goal with Chelsea right now, and they're still backing Graham Potter. And I'm still going to back him as well, even though, again, I understand why everyone's frustrated with him, and I do get that. It does make sense why you would be upset with Graham Potter, and I am upset with him as well. But I do not see why we would sack him, why that would be our best option. Because if we sack Graham Potter, who exactly comes in to fix this issue? I know I've talked about this before, but really all we have is Poch as our only option, really, to come in and fix this system. Could argue that, yes, Mourinho could come to this club because he's talked about coming back. But even that, we do not know how he would do with all these players, because sometimes his mentality is us versus them, which does work out most of the time, but I don't know if it would work with all these younger players. So therefore, that's another issue why if we sack Graham Potter, we have a lot more issues coming up then as well. So that's why I'm saying sacking him right now is probably not our best option, and running this out till the rest of the season makes the most sense. From there, I could say we could possibly sack him at the end of the season, because that would then give us a whole new manager option that we could bring into our club itself. So again, that does make sense. But right now, in between the season itself, it really would not make sense, because then we're trying to throw in a whole new tactic system, and most likely these players would struggle with that as well. And therefore, again, we're paying another manager that's not managing us anymore, and we may let him go as well by the end of the season. So therefore, we might as well ride it out with Graham Potter for the rest of the season, which I know fans do not want to hear. But again, it makes the most sense from a standpoint from the club itself to keep Graham Potter for the rest of the season, because if we do keep him and we start playing better, again, we're going to have a whole summer with his philosophy, with the players he brought in, and offloading some of the players that he did not bring in. And the last thing I do want to talk about is our goal differential, if not the goals that we've conceded. Now, yes, we have not scored goals. That is a big factor, and that is one of the many reasons why we're not losing. But if you look on the flip side of that, we have not let many goals in this season. We're at 23, I believe, after all our games we've played this season in the Premier League, which is second, or tied for second, I should say. There's only 2 teams that are actually equal or better than us, and that's Newcastle and Arsenal. And guess what? They're in the top 4. We've only let 23 goals in, which, like I said, is ridiculously good for our defense. It's just that we cannot score goals, and we do not have an out-and-out striker. Again, we could talk about Aubameyang, but that's not Potter's player. We only have Kai Havertz. Broja took an injury to his ACL, therefore we cannot use him, and we are lacking an attacking player. Fofana is too young yet to really step up and just take control for us, and therefore, again, it makes sense why he's not there. So if we were to get an out-and-out striker, which we probably should have got one during the January transfer window, we just weren't able to, that would make a huge difference. And the last thing is, the unfortunate thing, I know I talked about this before, is that Graham Potter had to go up against Manchester City twice in the League Cup and the FA Cup. Any team that had to go against Manchester City in both those tournaments would most likely lose, and therefore, because of that, we have less games for, again, Graham Potter to implement his tactics and get these players gelling. So give the guy some time. Again, I'm very frustrated with the results, but it does not make sense to sack this guy, because if we do, we're just going to be spinning our wheels again, and really, who knows who comes in, if they fix the system or even make it worse. And therefore, again, everyone's going to be talking getting that manager out. So right now, Graham Potter needs to keep his position as the manager at Chelsea. But like I said, at the end of the season, we will talk about that. That is my son in the background. I do apologize. But we will talk about later in the season how we're doing. But right now, Graham Potter, I think, still gets the okay go as a manager for Chelsea. I want to know what you guys think, though. So comment down below. I definitely understand people saying he should be out, but I think we should keep him.